A recap of last week's episode.
God was working on me before the beginning stages of my celibacy and abstinence, but I didn't know it. I was becoming impatient with people and losing attraction to them. I should have seen this beforehand, but back then I was too caught up in superficiality to recognize and understand God's work. The stages of becoming celibacy began rough, and there would be tumultuous days and nights ahead. I felt like something was missing, and I replaced that void with sex and attention. During that time, God kept talking to me, working on myself, but I wasn't listening. It wasn't until after my first 6 months of abstinence that I began to understand what God was showing me in my dreams and the clues he would give me through hearing and seeing others. I had ultimately become irritated with people and how everything had become so transactional and grifting when going on a date or simply meeting someone and getting to know them. I became increasingly unenthusiastic with the whole dating and getting to know people. Social media didn't make it any more accessible because it gave people the opportunity to embellish their person, which created a false sense of entitlement and exaggerated self-aggrandizement and encouraged and trafficked lies and identity theft mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. But there would be times when I would have flare-ups that were so penetrable it felt like my mind was going through a craving frenzy. I would do anything to relieve it. This craving would become so intolerable that I would relapse to needing a fix. I was an addict needing to feed or suffer the consequences, and I would oftentimes feel like I was losing my mind. I couldn't deny this craving, so I faltered and indulged. The first time I broke my commitment to celibacy and to abstain from sex weighed on me like having sex for the first time without marriage, and your conscience digs and preys on you because you spent your whole life in church and you having sex without marriage goes against everything you were taught. There were times I wasn't strong enough to help myself from being weak. And like all the trauma and other harmful things that had happened in my life, I overcame them through God's grace and mercy, giving me the will to withstand the sometimes overloading act of having sex. I had prayed to God for him to give me the strength to withstand the urges of having sex and the craving that would lure me to all its fixings at any cost. But I would backslide yet again before I had the power to say no fully and hold true to my convictions. Holding this strength to resist sex, I wholeheartedly believe was a gift from God to help me pass 6 months of abstinence and stand with my head high and not be defeated. Once I had completed my 6 months of abstinence, I was both elated and astonished at the same time. I could not believe it. Here was a man who had to have sex at any cost, even if it was to do the deed outside, in a car, get a quickie at the movies, or in a dimly lit lounge. It's a crazy thing. And I'm using the word crazy as an inference and not to demean the sensitivity of the word. But as soon as I had graduated from being a sex-craved addict to settling into my newfound solitude of abstinence, here comes temptation. Everything I had been interested in from the past sexually came front and center. Every person I would be attracted to was blatantly masquerading in front of my eyes, taunting and pulling at me. I now had the power from God to dismiss it. I knew it was only the devil making those suggestions because he wanted me to return to my old state of redundancy and addiction. My past weakness of big butts and legs for days, no matter who they were attached to, was the next thing that raised its ugly head. I had given the power to the idea and notion of my ideal type of a big butt and legs for days. And it had grown and cultivated through the years, stronger and stronger, until it not only defined me, but it could have been my destruction. Coming at me in full force like a thief in the night, seeking to steal, kill, and destroy, were people I wanted to smash in the past, old flings, past relationships, and new temptations in the form of the ideal person I wanted to settle down with in the past. But God was on the job. God was and still is my abundant light, who helped me to place my mind and thoughts into other things and not succumb to the wiles of the devil. Paraphrasing John 10:10. The repetition of being a single man in Atlanta and meeting all these people with facades to rival any magician's trick became unimpressive because I could see them coming from a mile away. As I settled into my newfound life of celibacy and abstinence, there were reenactments of a tug of war going on inside of me. See, I was still ultimately attracted to people. However, I wasn't having penetration sex with them when I often wanted to. The idea of having sex, even masturbation, became less and less appealing. I would quickly become convicted, and the Spirit would tell me that my actions and the person weren't my path. My body was still going through a withdrawal from intimacy. Not only was I not having sex, but I wasn't dating or even touching anyone at all. Years later, I learned that the reason my body was craving intimacy was because I was an empath and connecting with people was essential. In the early mornings, sometimes between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m., I would wake up and begin unpacking all the information I had collected the day prior. I started interpreting what I saw, smelled, and heard, receiving truth through conversations with God and insight from reading people's eyes and body language. But doing this sometimes would scare me because I wouldn't be prepared for what truths lie ahead that often became overwhelming. Beginning my celibacy and abstinence with all my falter was one of the most exciting experiences I have encountered thus far. Starting from 38 to now 51 years old, I'm at the point where I'm practicing semen retention, sometimes lasting 3 to 4 weeks without masturbation. Still, I have gone over 10 years without relapse. My goal is to go 6 months to a year at a time without masturbation. I realized that the more semen I retained, the more insightful I was, the more powerful. I have a heightened connection with God, and my premonitions and dreams are more in-depth and detailed and touch on a broader spectrum. I am in tune with my surroundings more. God has helped me to channel my sexual energies into heightening my other abilities of discernment. My premonitions and spiritual dreams have increased, and I now see glimpses of the future. I can read and catch people's past. I have consciously traveled to other worlds, and my sight or third eye has become overactive, allowing me to experience things I could not explain if I tried to. I have walked into my destiny, and God has revealed my path and who I am. My days are a constant enlightenment, and ever since my transcendence, I feel a strength of power that was never there before. I'm much calmer and less quick to react, and I now listen with intention and purpose. My blessings comes in waves where frequently they are abundantly overwhelming. The days themselves feel like blessings. The calmness over me is impressive, and I utterly enjoy my peace, solitude, and space. And more people I know, even strangers, come to me for insight, or they give me positive insight themselves. I am always smiling, and I feel great, just because others are inspired by me and feel compelled to become better than who they are. Lets me know my calling and the ability to endure is preordained by God. Welcome to Journey 365. I'm your host, Patrick A. Kelly. So before we get started, please join us in an open prayer. Lord, we thank you so much for allowing us to be here tonight. We thank you for all that you have enabled us to do and all that you will enable us to continue to do moving into the future. We thank you for everyone who has supported us, those who are seen and unseen. We thank you, dear Father, for blessing us and also for allowing the show to grow exponentially, dear Father. Lord, we ask that you continue to send people to us who are looking to be delivered, who are looking to share their journey, and through them sharing their journey, be delivered. Amen. Welcome to Journey 365. I'm your host, Patrick A. Kelly. Now, we're on episode 8, which is fear and stubbornness and struggling for my life. But before we get into that, I want to do, commentary on last week's episode, which was celibacy and abstinence from the beginning. Now, in that episode, I spoke on just the struggles that I went through in just even beginning my celibacy, not even completing 6 months on to multiple years, but just at the beginning, it was like I was, hooked on drugs, like severe drugs. For me to sustain not having sex for 2 to 3 weeks to a month, I felt like I was losing my mind. And me accomplishing not having sex for 6 months, that was only by the grace of God. So I can only give God the glory. When I accomplished that, it was a feeling that I'd never felt before. And having that sexual addiction, oh my goodness, it was, when I tell y'all I went through some crazy stuff. I've done some crazy stuff. So I can sit here right now and attest to you that I'm a changed man. I'm a different man, and I thank God for giving me the opportunity right now to be able to sit here right in front of you and to speak on that, because most people wouldn't want to do that. I hear it till this day that, people is like, why are you out there telling your business and stuff like that? I was like, those things that I went through in my life, it's not for me. It's not for me to hold on to. God allowed me to go through those things because he was building me up at the same time. You know what I'm saying? So, if I can help somebody else to get through, a situation like what I've gone through right now, I say, let's go. So be it. You know what I'm saying? So remember in episode 1, the message where I was speaking to you all about all the dreams that I had, things that God showed me. I want to first apologize now. There was one thing that I left off. God had spoken to me about banking and credit. God showed me that by early to mid 2026, there will be an issue with banking and credit where it will stop processing. It would just basically be a bunch of redundancy going on, and people won't be able to get their money out at all. So my answer to that was to tell you all that you all need to start diversifying your funds. American dollar that you have in the bank, you need to diversify that. Take that into gold and some other things. And also start purchasing things that you will be able to barter, that you can barter with other people. This is basically the notion that I've gotten from having had that dream and God speaking to me about banking and credit. God also told me the reason why I'm doing this podcast is to be the vessel, to be the message for our people, the real and true Israelites. They are God people. And God told me that He wanted me to be the message, to be the vessel for them, to help them to get to know who they are. And this is the reason why I'm here now. And you are hearing me spilling my entire life, all the dirt, all the juice, if that's what you want to call it, out to you all, so you can understand who I am and where God has brought me from. Because like in episode 1, the message where I told you that God, in the dream, God told me that He has been molding me since I was 3 years old. And I had to have experienced everything that I've gone through for me to be the man, to be the person that I am now, to be able to, one, be able to listen to God and be able to sit down and have that conviction and have that courage to be able to speak to you all on everything that I've gone through, so you can understand who I am, so you'll be able to trust, to know that everything that I'm bringing to you from God is honest truth. And if you guys still don't believe that, I say that you pray to God and ask God to show you. Ask God, say, hey, God, is Patrick A. Kelly, is what he's saying is the truth? And if you don't have that connection yet, that spiritual connection yet with God, where He will answer you when you ask Him things, then I say, listen, start working on who you are as a person. Take one day at a time. Ask God for deliverance. As God start delivering you from those things, the Holy Spirit will start convicting you and start showing you things and start telling you right from wrongs, and the things that you know that you shouldn't be doing. The Holy Spirit will tell you, say, hey, that's not right. Hey, don't do that. Hey, don't walk that way. Hey, don't hang with that person. As you start doing that, you will get a closer connection with God, where He will start showing you things. He will start telling you things, so you can get a better understanding of who you are, where you are in life, and what's going on and what's about to go down. So like I said in episode 1, the message, God told me that He wanted me to be the vessel, to be the message for His people, the true Israelites, so they can know all who they are. And once they learn who they are, God is gonna renew their spirit, renew their strength. God is gonna, they're gonna be able to take their place next to God. And God told me that and showed me that everybody who had a hand in their persecution and their demise would lose everything that they have to the true Israelites. So that is the message. And if you guys haven't listened to episode 1 and hear me speak on those dreams, I implore you to go back to episode 1, which is the message. The podcast is at Journey 365. It's the @ JRNY 365. Go back to episode 1 and listen to the message and hear me talk about verbatim those things that God showed me, God spoke to me in those series of dreams that I've had. So, without further ado, here is episode 8, which is titled Fear and Stubbornness and Struggling for My Life. This I can say and can attest that this has been what I've gone through, and what I'm describing to you, which is going to be a 3-part episode, is one of the most, if not the pivotal thing that happened to me in my life, because it changed every aspect about me and who I am. God allowed me to go through it, and it was because of my stubbornness and fears that I put my own self through that. But I think this was something that God wanted to happen to me, not wanted to happen to me, God allowed to happen to me for me to go through that change and that transformation, because prior to that, I was a mess. You know what I'm saying? I wasn't the worst person in the world, but I was a mess. And I thank God to this day, that he allowed me to go through everything that I'm speaking on episode 8. And I thank him so much because, that renewed my strength and it renewed my faith. And I give him all the honor and all the glory for allowing me to go through that. So again, here is episode 8, which is fear and stubbornness and struggling for my life. I hope you all enjoy it. And I hope you all send me messages just to let me know how that spoke to you, and if you would like to be on the podcast, please let me know. I do have a list of people that's going to be on the podcast after me. We'll also be chronicling their life stories and things like that and helping them to get deliverance through God. Okay. Thank you all again for supporting our podcast at Journey 365, and I hope you all enjoy. I'm Patrick A. Kelly, and this is my journey chronicled by significant incidents in my life that made me who I am today. Fear and stubbornness allowed me to make one of the biggest mistakes in my life, where I took 2 years from my life going through pain, suffering, and struggling for my life. If I had only been strong enough to quell the stupidity, the fear, and the stubbornness, what would my life have become for the 2 years lost? Was it God's plan? Because he knew who I was then and where I would be today if he steered me to a place that would have me end up where I am today. I stood there in the mirror, staring at my abs in disbelief, with my t-shirt partly raised to expose my stomach and looking at myself in the gym mirror. I knew I was working out consistently, but not enough to have a six-pack. I was beside myself, or even feeling myself. As some would say, I last had a six-pack years ago, as maintaining it takes more discipline than I cared to exhaust. So I was comfortable keeping my body fit and healthy and my stomach flat. But something wasn't right. I knew it and kept saying it to myself over and over, yet I did not go to see a doctor. Something was happening to my unfamiliar body, yet I did not allow it to raise the warning sign, requiring serious attention. See, in my 30s, I often considered myself invincible to care about visiting a doctor, or at least that was what I had to tell myself until things got so bad that I had no choice but to see a doctor. The word hate was something I always preferred not to use. And to be fair, I used it the few times I had to go to the doctor for something considered severe. Besides losing water weight, my body had begun losing fat and muscle mass because I did not know or learn what was happening to me until much later. I still ignored the problem. I remember one evening calling my sister Donna and telling her that I was having some stomach problems, and she suggested antacids. I had never taken pills for acid reflux before, but I purchased some on her recommendation. I had been getting acid reflux from time to time that would come up my esophagus and into my throat. I could taste the stomach acid, but I thought I could pacify the problem with Tums or any little antacids I would get my hands on. But a low, subtle voice kept telling me, you need to go to see a doctor. But I wouldn't listen. Instead, I kept self-diagnosing and even went out and bought more pillows to help keep my head raised so that the stomach acid wouldn't get to my throat. Still, the stomach acid did reach my throat, and things began getting so bad that it felt like waves were crashing in my stomach. I don't like going to the doctors, as I've stated a few times now, and I especially detested taking medicine of any kind. But when I kept getting these acid refluxes that had begun weighing heavily on me, I should have taken it more seriously and consulted a physician, but I did not. As time went on, my stomach began producing more and more acid, and it was so relentless that the buildup not only reached my esophagus, but also started creating problems for my throat. The repeated buildup of stomach acid in my esophagus began affecting my vocal cords, which created intermittent speech where a word or two would go missing from my formed sentences. Later on, you could only hear every 3 or 4 words when I opened my mouth to speak. I was losing my voice, and I was scared. I was terrified. My weight was also affected. I found myself losing weight drastically as it became more and more uneasy to swallow hard food, and even drinking smoothies would choke me at times. My sinuses were out of whack and kept draining down into my throat. I was miserable and had begun getting these sporadic instances when I felt tired, but I wasn't scared to the point where I thought I needed a doctor's care. So I kept pressing on like a stubborn and obvious fool. After taking a couple different antacids, self-diagnosing, and relegated to mostly drinking smoothies and other soft foods, I kept telling myself the issue would pass. Still too stubborn to see a physician, the scariest thing that changed the course of my thinking happened to me. While at a USL magazine photo shoot at Tree Sound Studios, something knocked the foolishness out of me. We had just arrived at the studio. Carlos, our photographer, Papa, our local producer, Christina, our PR agent, August, our PA, Nigel X, our local model and up-and-coming designer, and Patrice Story, our makeup artist, and I was setting up the first few shots when I began to lose my balance entirely and would fall flat on my face if August hadn't caught me. I felt dizzy and a little weak, and August helped me to sit down. You know the feeling you get when you're in the middle of suffering from the flu? That is how I felt. At that moment, my fear of going to the doctors turned into panic and concern for my person. No one said anything, but asked me if I was okay. I said I felt a little lightheaded and out of breath, but would feel better, which I did after sitting down for 10 to 15 minutes. The crew knew something wasn't right with me, but they didn't press it, especially when they saw that I was up and moving around, preparing things for the other scenes. I went through the rest of the day without incident, but had to take a couple breaks. I think we were on the shoot for about 6 hours or so. The next day, I scheduled an appointment to see a physician. When I arrived for my examination, I went through a gambit of tests, including having my throat x-rayed. During my exams, I stepped on the scale and my weight was 135 pounds, down from 155. In a matter of weeks, I started at 165. I began panicking. As the nurse asked me about my symptoms, I told her about the stomach problems I had been having, how my voice was leaving me, and the massive drains from my sinuses that were now affecting my hearing and even blurred sight every now and again. It felt like I had vertigo. Sometimes I would lose my balance while walking or standing up to walk. I told the nurse that I might be at the beginning stages of diabetes because some members of my family on my mother's side have had issues with obesity. So I thought the same thing was happening to me. The nurse said that might not be the issue, but she would also test for that. She pricked my finger for a drop of blood and quickly told me that it wasn't diabetes. She also drew blood to run the standard test to see what was going on in my body. After waiting in the examination room for 10 to 15 minutes, the doctor came in and told me that what I was experiencing were the symptoms of GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease. He then prescribed 20 milligrams of what would be the generic version of Prilosec and gave me a list of foods I could no longer eat. Eating tomatoes and spaghetti and meatballs was out. Drinking some juices and eating anything acidic was also on the list of things I could no longer consume. I was a wine drinker, and I especially loved full-body Chardonnays or a spicy Malbec, a crisp glass of Riesling or port, but those were now removed from my diet. The doctor also told me they would run other tests and contact me once they received the results. As I waited for the results, which seemed like a week or longer, I ran past scenarios of what else could be a problem. It never dawned on me that mineral and vitamin deficiencies like iron and magnesium could be other culprits aiding the breakdown of my body. Because my diet had changed drastically, by my inability to consume hard foods, my body wasn't getting all the vitamins and minerals needed to sustain itself or grow. So when I received a call from the doctor's office and was told that my body was void of many vitamins and minerals needed to stay healthy, I knew the road to recovery would be long and sometimes arduous. While taking the prescribed medication, it began helping my stomach to settle, but the worst was far from over. 6 months would pass before I would see a doctor, but the damage was already done by then. My fate was already sealed because of my stubbornness and fear of going to the doctor. My acid reflux had developed into GERD, thus causing my body to break down so much that my throat closed up. My weight went down to 115 pounds because I could not get enough nourishment, and I lost my voice entirely, where you could hear every 3 or 4 words in a short sentence. I was so weak, taking more than 4 to 5 steps felt like an uphill battle that would exhaust me so much that I became lightheaded, out of breath, and would have to rest so that I would not collapse. I could not work to earn money to live, eat, or even drive a car. In fact, I didn't even own a car. At that time, my sister Donna and I had a 2-bedroom apartment with a den off Sidney Marcus. My sister, doing hair in Maryland, lived in Atlanta and would go back and forth a week to 2 at a time. My young nephew Hakeem also lived with us briefly, but would return to New York when things began going downhill. There were times I became so weak I did not want to get out of bed. And when I did get out of bed to attend classes at GSU, it was an uphill battle again. I didn't have a car then, so I was catching the train and a short bus ride to get to and from school. Yes, while all these things were happening to me, I was enrolled at Georgia State University taking classes in journalism and film. I remember a public speaking class I took, and I had to get up in front of the class to give a speech. As I stood there attempting to give my address and everyone could ably make out a few words at a time, I noticed the students would gaze off, make faces, or whisper to each other. It was humbling. It was the most humbling experience I can recall to this day. As I stood there at the podium, I felt defeated, yet I was too stubborn to allow my sickness to take yet one more thing from me. The professor thought I was fibbing about my condition, and ultimately he failed me. But that wouldn't be my only altercation with a GSU faculty. See, my sickness had already taken my ability to work, where I had to draw food stamps and hustle via Craigslist, creating websites for potential entrepreneurs. I didn't have the strength to maintain my previous job in the restaurant industry, something I just could not do then. So I needed to make more money to pay my rent. Hence, I was on the verge of being evicted, and a utility or two would get cut off occasionally. I remember when my sister found out that we were getting evicted, she cried. And that was one of the worst moments in my life because I felt I had let her down. But that was just the beginning. Because my sister had to leave for work weeks at a time, she wouldn't be in Atlanta when we had to vacate our apartment or get our things thrown out. So I had to help the moving guy. Already weak to the point of wanting to stay in bed most days, the day that I moved everything from the apartment was a miracle in itself. My sister was there to help pack up everything, but moving those things to storage was worse than being tortured. Everything I lifted exhausted me further, and I can only say that every step I took was with a prayer to God. I felt like I was in hell, if anyone could describe that feeling. As we moved that final piece of furniture to the truck and later to the storage unit, I felt a joy like none other. I couldn't believe that all that I was experiencing physically, I could literally lift 40 to 50 pounds of boxes and furniture, whereas just taking a few steps here and there would leave me exhausted. All I can say is that God was on the job. Mentally, I told myself I could not do it. Still, God knew my strength when I doubted it without considering its accuracy. After moving everything to storage, I went to stay with a friend of mine who had just had a stroke at 33. We would live in that 4-bedroom house by CAU with another roommate and experience things you might only see in a movie. From being so broke, we couldn't sometimes buy food to eat, to being attacked and mugged, to being on the road to redemption. Recovery was something neither of us expected, but was thankful for. At age 51, I stopped running from God, and I fully embraced my destiny to the calling to be the message. To be the message and to do this podcast and the show, I had to lay myself bare as I'm doing now. So you can understand that this isn't a game at all. God is using me. He is using me to be the message for you. And he says, come as you are and be delivered. But to do that, you have to bear yourself to him and everyone because of our strength. God don't give us more than we can handle. And if he puts you through something like what I've gone through, or what you have gone through, or what you're going through now, it means that you are strong enough to handle it. And he didn't give you that. He didn't give you all of that blessing for you to hold on to it. He gave it to you so you can share it with others so that they too can be blessed and delivered and know the love of God. So I thank you so much for being here with me right now, because you have had so many other things that you could be doing. Thank you for starting this journey with me, and thank you for your support. I can't wait to meet each and every one of you to hear your story, for my continued deliverance and for the deliverance of others. Good night.
Patrick A. Kelly owns a copyright in and to all content in and transcripts of Journey 365 podcast, with all rights reserved, as well as his right to publicity. You are welcome to share the transcript up to a maximum of 400 words in media articles such as the AJC and other notable media platforms, on your personal website, in a non-commercial article or blog post, and or on a personal social media account for non-commercial purposes, provided that you include its attribution to Journey 365 podcast and link back to the Journey 365 podcast URLs. Media outlets with advertising models are permitted to use excerpts from the transcript per the above. No one is authorized to copy any portion of the podcast content or use Patrick A. Kelly's name, image, or likeness for any commercial purpose or use, including without limitation inclusion in any books, ebooks, book summaries or synopsis, streaming media, TV, film, or on a commercial website or social media site such as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Threads, TikTok, X, etc. that offers or promotes you or another products or services. For the sake of clarity, media outlets are permitted to use photos of Patrick A. Kelly from the Journey 365 podcast or licensed photos of Patrick A. Kelly from commercial image platforms. Content shared from tim.blog.